Hello lovely beaders. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video was inspired by a special request. By accident I made a resin cabochon that looked like an eyeball. My daughter, who likes to play video games, saw it and immediately thought of a game studio logo with a similar design. She asked if I could recreate that logo in beads. Well, I love a good challenge. The eyeball is not perfect because part of the iris is a little smudged. But that's exactly why this design is perfect for this cabochon, because we can think that the arrow could have caused the damage, right? A few weeks ago I was experimenting with resin and added a drop of iridescent alcohol ink to a clear cabochon mold by accident. It dried onto the mold and I only noticed it later when the alcohol evaporated and left this turquoise color behind. Instead of wiping it off, I poured a few drops of clear resin over it to see what would happen. I wasn't sure if I should keep it, but during another project I had some leftover opal white resin, so I used it to fill the mold. When I took it out, I realized I had unintentionally created a nearly perfect eye shape. But now let's start the project. I started the beading by stringing 22 pieces of size 11 delica beads and 18 pieces of size 11 seed beads. Because this cabochon is the same size like the one I used in pink piano earring. But I didn't think about the difference in the size of the beads. The delica beads are much more uniform and a tiny bit smaller than the seed beads. So I ended up starting again with less beads. I made a circle with the beads, then I made the first row in peyote. But like you see, the bezel is too big for the cabochon, so I started over. It is bigger with at least 2 seed beads. So my second attempt was stringing 22 delica beads and 16 seed beads. When I make peyote stitch I need an even count of beads, but with the 38 beads I will have problems when it comes to the decreasing of the back. But I'm not going to worry about the back yet. I'm going to make a circle with the beads and starting my first peyote row. I tried to maintain a balance between the two colors, but at times I wanted to break the straight line between them. So instead of pink I used white, hoping it would make that section look more organic. In the end it didn't make much of a difference to the overall look. But in this row I strung the white section with white and the rose section with rose. I didn't vary anything. I did a plain simple peyote row. Because this is a simple peyote row, I will speed up the video where I make the same thing to not bore you with the repeated parts of the beading. But I will always slow down the video if there is any change. Because this is a bezel made with tubular peyote stitch, I work in a continuous circle. But each row still has an ending point, so I need to keep track of where my row ends and where I need to start a new row. So when I reach the last bead from my starting circle, I have to step up to start the next row. And to do the step up, I need to go through the last seed bead from my starting circle and the first delica bead strung in the new row. And I need to check if my bezel is big enough for the cabochon. And luckily is perfect. I start my second peyote row, but now I use size 15 seed beads. I'll continue the color pattern, so where is white I string white and where is rose it will be rose. With this beading I wanted to show you the planning phase as well. So you can see the process I go through until a finished piece of jewelry is born. I'll leave all my mistakes in the video, and at the end, I'll also explain what changes I made to the final piece of jewelry that weren't recorded. I hope you won't get bored and watch it all the way through. I only changed the color on my last bead. I strung white instead of pink to try to break up the sharp transition between the colors. I hoped it would look good, but it didn't change the look of the jewelry. I checked that the bezel was still good for the cabochon, and since it seemed good, I continued with a second row of peyote with the size 15 seed beads. Since I am an experienced beader and have made many bezels over the years, I automatically beaded this part. But meantime I started wondering how to solve the next step, what technique to use to make the spear. I quickly ruled out bead crochet because it would give a much thicker end result. Herringbone would make the end result more square. And then it occurred to me that a peyote tube with only 4 beads would be easy to make. The end result would be quite thin and round. Yes, but the spear also has a tip, which is not easy to shape when you have only 4 beads in the circle. Shaping the tip of the spear I felt was more of a problem now. The front side of the bezel is finished. The cabochon still fits in, and I think the colors are good. Now I need to lead my thread to the back side of the bezel and start the first peyote row with size 15 seed beads. I'll continue the color pattern in this side too. So whereas white I string white and whereas rose it will be rose. Nothing fancy, just simple peyote rows. Oops, I lied. I switch one rose with white to blend the line between the colors. But like I said before, it doesn't matter in the end. The change is too small to be noticeable in the final result. The only thing you can see in the finished piece is that the white and pink are in a 50-50 ratio. I forgot to mention that after every peyote row I step up for starting the new row. Before I pull this row tight I put the cabochon inside. I start a new peyote row with the size 15 seed beads. It is not easy to keep the cabochon inside the bezel and make the peyote with the size 15 seed beads. But after this row the cabochon will stay in the bezel and it will be easy to make the last rows. Did you see my other video this week where I showed how I make resin cabochons? It was a learning experience for me because recording resin videos is quite different. I had to adjust my phone angle and figure out how to stay in frame. But I'm really glad I took the time to film, edit, and upload it so I could share my process with you. At the end of the row I step up for the next row. Now I can cut my thread's tail. And the bezel is tight enough to keep the cabochon inside. I start another peyote row. I didn't plan on making a back for this cabochon like I did for the pink piano earrings. I just wanted the cabochon to sit securely in the setting and not want to fall out or turn. The next row will be a decreasing row. Since I have 19 beads in a row and 19 is a prime number, meaning it cannot be divided by anything except 1 and itself, I cannot do the decreasing correctly. But if you know me, you know that I have a plan already. And with the last bead from this row I step up for the next row. I just noticed that my cabochon is not facing the way I originally planned. The plan was for the smudged part of the iris to face the pink side, as if it had been damaged by the spear as well. So I try to force the cabochon to rotate in its already tight bezel so that it faces the right way. This is the decreasing row. Instead of adding beads in every gap, I'll only add them in every second one. So I string a bead in the first gap, skip the next, then add another bead in the third gap. I string only white beads in this row. And I repeat doing this until I can't skip a gap with my last bead, because I have only one gap where I need to string a bead. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Your support helps me keep creating free content. Every like, comment, and share makes a difference. Want to do more? You can buy me a coffee or check out my tutorials and jewelry. Links are in the description. Thank you so much for helping me keep this channel going. And here is my last bead. With this bead I cannot make a decrease, but I need to string it in the last gap. And it is not easy to bead now because my needle is all wonky. The bezel is finished. The cabochon stays tight in the bezel and I am pleased with the end result. I wanted to weave in my thread because I figured if I messed up the spear part and had to undo it, at least the bezel would stay intact. So, I tried to weave the thread into the bezel so I could cut it. Don't laugh, but honestly this part was harder for me than the actual bezeling. Because my needle won't cooperate with me. So I thought I'd give it a makeover to be more straight. I didn't want to replace it with a new needle yet. This needle became crooked because I was beading too tightly, and luckily this needle doesn't break but bends. But I wasn't sure the new needle wouldn't break. I would normally cut this part out, but I decided to leave it in so you can see just how much I sometimes struggle with my own nonsense. I did speed it up, but you can still count how many times I had to straighten my needle just to keep going. It is not easy to be me, I know. But bear with me. I'm almost done. And yes, I can be that stubborn when I think I can do something. But I finally got the 3 turnarounds and I could cut the thread. And after all that struggling to weave in and cut off the thread, I had to struggle again. This time to thread it back in, secure it, and lead it to the center of the white section. Here, I'm just checking that the thread is secure and won't slip out even with a strong pull. Then I find the center white beads and finally start the beading of the dagger. And yes, I am struggling with finding the good spot to start the beading. At this point I'm still trying to decide in my head exactly how I'm going to start, bead, and finish this part of the spear. But I'll soon get to the point where I'm like, okay, let's get started, this is a good place to start. And finally here it is. I come out of one of the middle white delicas in the 3rd delica row, pick up a size 15 seed bead, and go into the next delica in this delica row. Then I pick up another size 15 seed bead and go through the middle delica from the 1st delica row. This delica sits directly beside the previous one. Then I pick up another size 15 seed bead and go into the other middle delica in the same row. After that, I pick up one more size 15 seed bead and go through the delica in the 3rd row. That makes 4 seed beads added. Now I step up by going through the first seed bead I added and start beading in peyote stitch. Simple, right? I just need to remember to step up for every new row. And here is my step up. I go through the last bead from the 1st row and the first bead strung in this row. And I start a new peyote row. I can already see that my idea was a good one. If I continue, this will become a round, thin spear. I'll make the rest of the spear off camera, but I'll come back to show you how I finish the spear and how I make the bead loop for the hanger. I am back. My spear is long enough. I made 20 rows of peyote and now I will show you how I finished it. I went through the beads of the last row by pulling them together to close the end of the spear. My first thought for the hanger was to be parallel to the pendant. So I checked the position and lead my thread to the next bead. But later I changed the position of my hanger. I will talk about this in the end of the video. I string 5 seed beads and I go through the 3rd bead in the circle. That bead is opposite to the bead where I am stepping out. I turn back in the beads and I go through the bead where I started to make the loop. And I secure the loop by going through the beads again. And I will weave in my thread and cut it off camera. I'm going to speed up this part of the video because this idea didn't work out, but I still wanted to leave it in to show you what I originally had in mind. My first thought for shaping the tip of the spear was to create a pointed herringbone triangle and somehow transition it into a round section, which would then allow me to bead the straight part of the spear. But I quickly realized that this approach wasn't going to work. So here's a little glimpse of another beading mistake before I move on to the actual solution. At this point, I didn't know that this was a bad idea. I kept on beading vigorously, eagerly waiting the end of the row to see how I could continue this part. But here I knew that this idea won't work this way. It is not what I wanted. I need a new solution. My new plan was to make the round, straight part of the spear first, just like I did on the other side of the pendant. So I secured my thread on the pink side. I led my thread to the middle seed bead from the first row, and started making the spear exactly the same way I did on the white part. I will make my spear off camera, but it is made just like I made it on the other side. I string 4 pieces of size 15 seed beads in a circle and make the spear in tubular peyote stitch using this 4 seed beads. Here I am with a longer tubular part of the spear and I want to start making the tip of the spear. I string 2 seed beads instead of 1 in every gap of the row. With this I start the upper wide part of the spear tip. I mix the herringbone stitch with the peyote stitch to achieve what I think will look good and create the pointed part of the spear. To start the new row I go through the last bead from the peyote row and the first bead from the first herringbone unit. I make another herringbone row to widen the tip of the spear, but between the herringbone units I string 1 seed bead. You'll notice on the final pendant that this part of the spear has been modified. But I didn't do anything to it other than what I'm showing, except I made the straight part longer because when I finished it, it felt short, disproportionate to the rest of the pendant. But I made the tip of the spear the same way, there's no change to that. With my last bead I step up for the next row. In this row I string 1 bead instead of 2 beads to every herringbone unit. And I am just going through the beads between the herringbone units, I am not stringing anything between them. So I'm going to string a bead between the 2 beads from the first herringbone unit. Then I'm going to go through both beads of this herringbone unit. Then I'm going through the bead between the 2 units and through both rows of the second herringbone unit. And I repeat around. That way this part will stay flat and won't curl up. I need this flat part because this is going to be the shoulder of the spearhead. This is what makes the spearhead stick out from the round tube part, and this is what really makes the spearhead visible. And as I progress with this row, I keep thinking about how I'm going to make the pointed part of the spearhead. But slowly the idea takes shape and I already know how I will continue. After I made all 4 corners, I lead my thread to the bead strung between the herringbone units. I string 2 seed beads and go through the next seed bead between the herringbone units. And I repeat this all around. When I string the last 2 seed beads, I go through not only the bead between the herringbone units but the first strung 2 seed beads too. This is the step-up part. I start a peyote row using the 2 seed beads like a unit. So I string 1 seed bead and go through the next unit of 2 seed beads. And repeat around. And of course with my last bead I step up for the next row. This is a simple peyote row. I string 1 seed bead between every seed bead in the row. And I step up for the next row. This last row is a simple peyote row again. I close the tip of the spear by going through the last strung beads. To make the tip of the spear pointier, I string 1 bead on top of the last circle. I step out from a bead from the circle, I string 1 bead, I go through the bead from the opposite side and I reinforce this bead by going through again. The base shape is done, and as I mentioned, I'll be reworking the bottom of the spear later to make it longer. But for now I consider it finished and moved on. Next comes the decoration, which will imitate the nerve extending from the eyeball, wrapping around the spear. To start the decoration I need to lead my thread down to the beginning of the spear, next to the cabochon. When I reach the first row of the spear I step out from a bead. I string a rose bead and go through the second bead from that row. I turn back and string a rose bead and go through the rose bead strung previously. This decoration will be a 2-bead peyote strip. So I turn, string a bead, turn again. It is simple like that. I string this strip until it is long enough that when I wrap it around the spear, it reaches the shoulder of the spearhead. When I decide the strip is long enough, I pass through a bead at the spearhead while adding the last bead. The goal is simply to secure the strip. It doesn't matter how, as long as the thread stays hidden. I pass through a bead, turn back and guide the thread until I reach a point where I can stitch through the pink strip again to reinforce its attachment to the spear. I only try to find a good spot where I can secure the strip again. And that's all. Then I weave in my thread and cut it. This is the only footage of the pendant in this stage. As I mentioned multiple times throughout the video, I made a few adjustments to the final piece. For example, I changed the bead loop used for the hanger because the pendant kept turning when worn, which bothered me. So I took it apart and re-beaded it to sit perpendicular to the cabochon. I also took apart the bottom of the spear and extended the straight section to twice its original length. And that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for hanging out with me. Bye for now.